Hi, I'm Bryn Edwards, Benchmarking Lead from Vegetables WA, and this is Paul Omaday, Senior Farm Consultant from Plan Farm. We've completed the first year of benchmarking, and we're going to present to you the findings here in this presentation. So Paul, before we get into it, why is this really important?
I think the main thing about first year results in anything, Bryn, is to fine-tune the process, fine-tune the results, make sure we've got the right data and anything extra that we think we can actually look into in the businesses. So these results are important for us to actually make sure the process for year 2 and 3 are actually better again.
So let's have a look at the findings. So Paul, what did we find?
Okay, so pretty much the key insights that we gained out of this year, Bryn, are pretty much there's some positive outcomes, but there's a very, very wide range.
Yeah.
And that's not uncommon in benchmarking results. We do know that the best growers produce more income and control their operating costs. And also there's some really clear indications that you can generate some positive returns and good returns on capital. I think there's also some indications there that there's some possibly easy changes for growers to make to look at their profits and where they come from. And this is mainly around the areas of expenses and income. But also the overall industry average numbers, they'll change as we get more data. So I think what's important about benchmarking is that we've got a real good start this year, but what we need is more of the information so the data becomes stronger.
Yeah, and I think one of the important things at this stage is to point out that these are the industry findings. If you want to know more detail, then that's down there in the individual grower report, isn't it?
Exactly. So this is just a very broad overall, so it gives you the averages. But if you really want the individual data, then that's what your report shows, just your data up against the individual average, the industry averages.
And to get that, you need to participate.
Before we get into the detail, let's have a look at how we've actually ranked everyone in terms of the data set. So pretty much as the results this year were growers were ranked on your operating profit per hectare. So that basically anonymises everyone from where they are or what they grow. So pretty much on an operating profit per hectare, you could be in Carnarvon or Manjimup or anywhere. So there's...
And it doesn't matter the size of the scale then, because it's done by
big or small. Yeah, it's done on a per hectare basis. So that's how all the growers were ranked, and then we put them into a whole data set average. So pretty much what you see as the industry averages is the average of that whole data set that we collected. Then the top 25% and the bottom 25%, so the numbers that you see for that are the averages of those groups. Yeah. So there's still a range within those groups, but they are the averages that you'll see.
Okay, so let's jump into the results.
Yeah, if we move on to the next slide. So pretty much this is the key part of what we're really after in benchmarking. This is about return on capital. So again, what we see here is this huge gap between the top 25% and the average. Obviously there's some, at the bottom 25%, there's really concerning numbers. And this may be due to seasonal performance or price or market performance. So it's not necessarily meaning that these are really bad businesses, but there's some big effects between the top and the bottom. What it really does show in simplicity is that the top 25% are producing 19% return on capital. So, and the difference between them and the average is 15%. So only the averages are producing 4%. So in simplicity terms, if you've got $1 million of capital tied up in the business, these top 25% producers every year are producing $150,000 more operating profit.
That's a lot.
It's a big number, and when you extrapolate that over a 10-year period, that's an even bigger number.
It is.
So these are quite ranging variations.
And that 4%, that's not that much higher than just leaving your money in the bank rather than buying all the kit.
That's right. And look, remember that these are 1-year numbers. So, you know, we've got some really good data here to say what the top and the average do. What we really need now is to actually get some more data from a number of years so we can actually see what the top and the average do between years and over a period of time.
Where would you like to see that average based on your experience of having done benchmarking over many years in the wider agriculture space?
Yeah, I think in agriculture in general, I mean, look, we'd like to see a return on capital of 8%. That's a key performance indicator that we put to our producers. It obviously depends on the level of ownership in assets and where you farm and land value. So that is sometimes a very hard number to achieve, but certainly I think if you've got a target, at least you know where you can hit to. But we'd certainly like to see that 6 to 8%, but 8% is a number.
Yeah.
So that's return on capital, but even more important than that is to actually look at what the different vegetable growers do in terms of operating profit. So if we move through the analysis, what you can see here is equity or stability of a business. And this is important because this shows the strength of a business to withstand pretty much a shock, whether that be climatic shock, a pricing shock, to actually show how strong the business is in actually being able to withstand that and move forward the next year.
And what do you see here in these averages?
So in these averages, which we generally see in Broadacre too, funnily enough, is that there's not much difference between the top and the average in terms of their equity. So as an equity percentage, 83% versus 80 is not very much of a difference. And they are very strong businesses. What that means is that those businesses have good equity to be able to rebound from something of a shock in the business. So they can actually move forward and start producing again the next year. These guys here that are down the bottom, in the bottom 25%, that's really a tough place to be in the industry. So
it's not really bad, is it? But it's not that strong when you look to the future.
It's certainly not strong when we like to see these numbers 80% and above. And I think this is a really important slide that the financial industry likes to look at. And if you're in this area here of 60%, it just means that if something goes wrong that year, whatever it might be, then it's pretty tough to actually borrow more money or find more money from in the business to then go again the next year. So it's it's not a dire area to be in, but it's certainly not a healthy one going forward.
And certainly with this being a long-term gain, anything in agriculture, it's a long-term game. You want to see that increase, don't you?
Yeah, most definitely. We want to see strength in the balance sheet of clients so that they can actually, like I say again, withstand any shocks in the business. So that's equity, which gives you the strength of the business. But how does the operating of the business work? So if we go through to the next slide, we look at operational side of the business. So pretty much in this database, what this looks at is our operating cost percentage or our operating efficiency. So this is where the real driver of how much money you make in the business. So what this shows as an industry average, the operating percentage of farm income was 83%. Now, in simple terms, that means we're spending 83 cents to make $1. So there's not much left over to pay for finance, tax, depreciation and wages of management. So
that makes it quite skinny, doesn't it?
It makes it very skinny. And when you look at 17% left over, we like to see this number of 83% in the 65% range, which means that you've got 35 cents in every dollar to actually pay for those overheads, but then have some surplus falling out the bottom to grow. Another key point about this is that the average operating profit per hectare from the industry was just under $8,000 a hectare, which is a significant number. But what's really powerful about this operating cost is that if growers, the average of the industry, can reduce this 83% by 5%, just to go back to 78, that will actually increase their operating profit by over $2,000 a hectare, which is 30%. It's a third of their current industry operating profit. So it's a big number to change on such a small basis. So just a small, and that might be in dropping costs, but it might be in actually improving how you use the cost to make more income.
Indeed.
So if we go into looking at how this goes across the average and the top 25%, what we see here, which is really quite stark, is that there's a large gap between the top 25% and how much income they produce.
Certainly in this purple bar here relating to vegetable income.
That's the vegetable income. Then in the green bar, we've got the operating costs, and obviously the red bar is what's left over. So really quite stark in this picture is how much the costs are very similar between the top.
They are, aren't they? If you look at these bars, they're not worlds apart. In fact, this bottom 25% and the top 25%, very similar, aren't they?
Very similar, and these guys are just not making enough income for the money they're spending. So their counterparts that are spending similar money per hectare are making a lot more profit. This doesn't look like much of a difference, but this is quite a big scale. So this difference between the average and the top there is still about $8,000 a hectare. So yes, the top 25% are spending a little bit more, but they're certainly getting the income results.
Yeah, certainly these guys in the top 25%, they've got an operating efficiency of 67%.
That's right, which compared to the average of the industry, which we saw on the previous slide was 83%, is a very big difference in terms of what costs they're spending to make income. And that's a combination mainly of they are spending a little bit more money, but they're making a lot more money, a lot more income.
Yeah. So what is it that the top 25% really did that made them get these great results?
That's a really good question, Bryn. So if we go to the next slide and look at what the top performers in that 16-17 year did, pretty much they had a 15% higher return on capital, which was a result of their operating surplus, but they actually got 22% lower operating efficiency. So that's that 83% in the average of the industry versus 67, so quite a big number. And they've also got an operating profit per hectare of just under or just over $24,000.
Yeah.
So versus the industry average, which I think was about 7,000, it's 3 times the operating surplus or the operating profit in the business than the average.
That's a lot of profit.
So that's quite big differences what the top performers do.
And also, if we dig a bit further underneath these numbers and we look at the next slide, we can start to see what were the actual key business practice differences between the top 25 and the average. And one of the things that we found was they kept really good production and financial records, and then they produced annual budgets, and then they tracked themselves against that. There's also some stuff around the specific crop rotations, and we'll dig into that more in year 2. But I thought these were really interesting, Paul, in terms of the fact that they measure and then they hold themselves accountable throughout the year.
Yeah, that was very clear, Bryn. I mean, you know, we can set annual budgets and leave them in the drawer, but obviously our top 25% producers are certainly setting the budgets, and they're actually making sure that they follow them, which is where the key operational cost control is, and they're actually producing the income at the other end. So they're certainly looking at their businesses quite regularly, which is a key part of those businesses.
And I think one thing I noticed about the top 25%, and sort of anecdotally travelling around having met them all, is that the top 25% really focus on the things that they can control. They're not getting sidetracked by other things out of their control. Whereas the bottom 25%, often their conversations did focus on things that were out of their control.
They can do, and I think the other thing around those top 25 was that they did have a very key focus on what they did, and they did it very well.
Yeah, very focused, very organised.
Very much so, yeah.
Super stuff. So they're the first year findings. As you can see, some really interesting stuff. We'll be going again this year, and if you want to get involved, if you want to learn how your business is stacking up against the industry findings, and you want some more information about where you can make efficiencies and where you can make improvements, then click on the link and let's get you involved in benchmarking.